Let me paint you a picture. It's 6:47 in the morning. Your alarm goes off, and for a split second, just a fraction of a second, you have a choice. You can hit snooze, pull the covers over your head, scroll Instagram for 45 minutes looking at other people living their lives, or you can do something different. But here's the thing nobody tells you. That split second, that tiny invisible moment between the alarm and your decision, that's not just a choice about sleep. That is a vote for who you are, a vote for the kind of man or woman you're becoming. Every single day you are either building yourself up or slowly, quietly, painfully dismantling yourself. And most people don't even notice it's happening. Now, I want to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with yourself because nobody's watching. When was the last time you felt genuinely in control of your life? Not just going through the motions, not just surviving the week, but actually, deeply, solidly, in control. Like the direction of your life was something you chose, not something that just happened to you. For most people, that feeling is rare, fleeting, like something they used to have, or something they've been promised they'll have once they get the promotion, once they find the relationship, once they lose the weight, once they finally have enough money. But what if I told you that that feeling, that groundedness, that unshakable calm, that quiet confidence, isn't waiting at the end of something, it's a practice, and it's been documented, tested, and proven for over 2,000 years. What I'm about to walk you through isn't a motivational speech. I don't do that. This is a deep dive into 11 habits that the ancient Stoics didn't just preach, they lived. Soldiers used them on battlefields. Emperors used them running empires. Slaves used them to maintain their dignity when they had nothing else. And today, they are being used, quietly, deliberately, by the people who seem to navigate life with a kind of inner stillness that makes you wonder, what do they know that I don't? Now you're going to find out. Stick with me for all 11. Each one builds on the last. And by the end of this, I promise you, you will look at your daily life completely differently, not because I told you to, but because you'll see it. Let's go. Habit 1. Build your inner citadel before the world wakes up. There's a man named David Goggins. You may have heard of him. Former Navy SEAL, ultra-marathon runner. Considered by many to be one of the hardest human beings alive, he grew up in poverty, was abused as a child, failed the military's entrance tests twice, and was told by a doctor that he had a heart defect that would likely disqualify him from service permanently. He did what most people would never do. He got up earlier, not to work out, not to train, but to sit quietly and have what he calls a conversation with himself. Every single morning before the noise of the world started, he would sit with the uncomfortable truth of where he was and deliberately build the mental image of where he was going. What Goggins was doing, without knowing the exact term, was practicing what the Stoics called building your inner citadel. Marcus Aurelius, Roman emperor, arguably the most powerful man alive during his reign, would wake before his household stirred. Not to read reports, not to check messages. He would journal, privately, honestly, brutally. His notes to himself, the ones he never intended for public eyes, became what we now call meditations, one of the most widely read philosophical texts in human history. And the first line of almost every entry was a form of self-examination, not self-criticism. Self-examination. There is a difference. Here's the practical reality. You do not need a Roman palace or a military background. You need 11 minutes. That's it. The moment you wake up, before your phone, before the news, before anyone else's agenda enters your mind, you take 11 minutes and you do 3 things. 1. You sit in silence for 3 minutes. No input, no music, no podcast, just silence. Your brain, which has been in a semi-conscious restorative state all night, is in what neuroscientists call a theta wave state for the first few minutes after waking. This is when your subconscious is most receptive. Filling that space with noise is like planting weeds before your seeds have a chance to take root. 2. You spend 4 minutes asking yourself one single question and writing down the answer, not typing, writing. The question is, what is the one thing that, if I do it today, makes everything else easier or irrelevant? This is not a to-do list. This is clarity. This is prioritization at the deepest level. 3. You spend 4 minutes reading something that requires thought, not a news headline, not a Reddit thread, something that challenges you, a page of Marcus Aurelius, a chapter of Ryan Holiday, a passage of Viktor Frankl. You are feeding your mind before the world gets a chance to mess with it. 11 minutes. That's your inner citadel. That's your fortress. And here's what happens when you do this consistently. The external noise, the office politics, the social media arguments, the anxiety spiral at 2 p.m. It doesn't hit the same way, because you've already centered yourself. You've already chosen your frame for the day before the day chose one for you. Epictetus, a man who was born a slave, who had no rights, no property, no freedom of movement, said this: "Men are disturbed not by things, but by the opinions about things." What he meant was, the event itself rarely destroys you. Your interpretation of the event does. When you build your inner citadel every morning, you are preemptively choosing your interpretation. You are deciding, in advance, that today you are the observer of your life, not the victim of it. That is a radical act. In a world that is specifically engineered to steal your attention, choosing to own the first 11 minutes of your day is one of the most powerful things you can do. Start tomorrow, not Monday. Tomorrow. Habit 2. Dress for the person you're becoming, not the person you have been. In 2012, a team of researchers at Northwestern University conducted an experiment. They gave 2 groups of people identical white lab coats. They told one group the coats belonged to doctors. They told the other group the coats belonged to painters. Then they gave both groups identical tasks requiring focus and precision. The doctor group outperformed the painter group significantly. Same coat, different story, different result. They called this phenomenon enclothed cognition. The clothes you wear don't just affect how others see you, they affect how you see yourself, and how you see yourself affects how you perform. This isn't vanity, this is neuroscience. Now, the Stoics had a complicated relationship with appearance. On one hand, Epictetus famously said that external things, wealth, beauty, social status, are not within our control and therefore should not be the source of our happiness. He was right about that. But Marcus Aurelius took a different view when it came to self-presentation as an act of intentionality. He believed that how you showed up, your posture, your bearing, the way you carried yourself, was a direct reflection of the respect you had for your own character. It wasn't about impressing others, it was about embodying your values visually. Think of it this way: if you value discipline, does your appearance reflect discipline? If you value strength, does the way you carry yourself communicate strength? If you value seriousness of purpose, does the way you present yourself to the world communicate that you take your purpose seriously? This isn't about spending money. Let me be very clear about that. This is about intentionality. There's a concept in behavioral psychology called identity-based habit formation, which James Clear popularized in Atomic Habits. The idea is this: instead of focusing on the outcome you want, focus on the identity you want to inhabit. And then ask, what would a person of that identity do? A person who respects themselves gets up and dresses intentionally. even if they're working from home, even if no one is going to see them. Because the act of dressing with care is not for the audience, it's for the mirror. It's the signal you send to your own nervous system. I am someone who shows up properly. Start with the basics. Clean clothes, good posture. And yes, posture is something you can control. Eye contact when you speak, a firm handshake, a measured, unhurried walk. These are not superficial things. They are the external language of your internal state. When you align your outer presentation with the person you're working to become, you close the gap between aspiration and identity. And that gap, that distance between who you are and who you believe yourself to be, is where most of your anxiety lives. Close the gap. Start with what you wear. Habit 3. Train your face to lead your brain. In 1988, social psychologist Fritz Strack conducted what became one of the most replicated and most debated experiments in psychology. He asked participants to hold a pen in their mouth in 2 ways. One group held it with their lips, preventing a smile. The other held it with their teeth, forcing a smile-like expression. Then both groups rated the funniness of cartoon strips. The group forced into a smile-like expression consistently rated the cartoons as funnier. They weren't happier because of a thought. They were happier because of a muscle movement in their face. This is the facial feedback hypothesis. And while it's been debated and refined over the years, the underlying neurological reality has held. The emotional signals don't just travel from brain to face. They travel from face to brain. The relationship is bidirectional. What this means for you is extraordinary. You do not have to wait to feel better before you start acting better. You can start acting better, including physically, and the feeling follows. James Stockdale was a United States Navy pilot who was shot down over Vietnam in 1965 and spent 7.5 years as a prisoner of war, most of it in solitary confinement, routinely tortured. He was the senior American officer in the Hanoi Hilton, one of the most brutal prison camps in modern history. He later said something that has stayed with philosophers, psychologists, and military leaders ever since. He said that the prisoners who didn't survive weren't the pessimists. They weren't even necessarily the weakest. They were, paradoxically, the optimists. The men who said, "We'll be out by Christmas." And then Christmas came, and they weren't out. Those men broke. Stockdale survived by practicing something deeply stoic. He accepted the brutal reality of his situation without letting that reality determine his internal state. He controlled what he could control. He maintained his bearing. He held himself together, not by pretending things were fine, but by refusing to let the external determine the internal. The composure on his face wasn't weakness. It was armor. Here is how this translates into your life, right now, today. The next time you feel stress rising, your manager sends a passive-aggressive email, someone cuts you off in traffic, you get unexpected bad news. Before you react, do this. Take one deliberate breath. Allow a slight, barely perceptible relaxation of your jaw, and choose your expression. Not a fake grin, not performed happiness, just composure. The deliberate act of not allowing your face to broadcast your distress to the room, because your face is not just information for others, it is feedback for yourself. When you practice this, and it is a practice, it takes weeks to build the reflex, you will notice something remarkable. The emotional intensity of difficult moments begins to reduce, not because you're suppressing it, but because you've interrupted the feedback loop that amplifies it. Composure is not cold. It is not indifference. It is the conscious decision to remain the person you choose to be, even when the world is trying to make you someone you don't want to become. Habit 4. Master the art of the closed gate. When Marcus Aurelius became emperor, he made a decision that confused many of his advisors. He kept Lucius Verus, his co-emperor and adoptive brother, close in official matters, while very deliberately limiting his exposure to Lucius's private social circles, which were known for excess, indulgence, and moral laxity. Marcus was not unkind to Lucius. He was not dismissive or contemptuous. He continued to treat him with respect, shared power with him generously, and publicly supported him. But he understood something that most people take decades to figure out. You can care about someone and still protect yourself from the patterns they carry. He maintained what I call the closed gate, respectful, deliberate, firm. Here's an exercise that will be uncomfortable, but genuinely life-changing. Think about the 5 people you spend the most time with. Not the people you wish you spent time with, the people you actually consistently do. Now ask yourself honestly, after spending time with each of these people, do I generally feel more energized or less? Do I feel clearer or more confused? Do I feel more like myself or slightly less? This is not about judging people. It's about honest accounting. Your energy is finite. Your attention is finite. Time is finite. And every hour you spend in the company of someone who consistently drains your sense of self, even if they're someone you love, even if they mean well, is an hour you are not investing in becoming the person you are capable of becoming. The Stoics called this associating with those who will improve us. Epictetus was explicit. The company you keep has a direct effect on your character, not because people are bad influences necessarily, but because we are social creatures and we regulate our emotions, our ambitions, and our standards in relation to the people around us. You will, over time, become an average of the people you surround yourself with. Not metaphorically, neurologically. Your brain literally syncs to the emotional rhythms of the people you spend the most time with. The closed gate is not a cold shoulder. It is not ghosting. It is not cruelty. It is a quiet, firm, dignified management of your exposure. In practice, it looks like this. You reply to messages on your own schedule, not immediately. You decline invitations that conflict with your priorities without lengthy explanations or apologies. You spend less time in environments that feel like a step backwards and more time in environments that feel like a step forward. You are unfailingly polite, warm even, and you protect your time and energy as though they are the most valuable resources you own, because they are. One of the greatest things you will ever do for your relationships is be highly selective about which ones you invest deeply in. Spread too thin, you become mediocre to everyone. Focused and intentional, you become genuinely present and genuinely valuable to the people who matter most. Open the gate for those who deserve access to your time and your energy. Keep it closed, politely, firmly, without drama, for everyone else. Habit 5. Become the eye of the storm. In 2009, U.S. Airways Flight 1549 departed LaGuardia Airport in New York. At an altitude of approximately 2,800 feet, the aircraft struck a flock of Canada geese. Both engines lost thrust almost simultaneously. Captain Chesley Sully Sullenberger had approximately 208 seconds to save 155 lives. In the cockpit recording, you can hear his voice. It is measured. It is quiet. It is so calm that investigators later noted it was one of the most remarkable examples of professional composure ever captured in an aviation emergency. He did not yell. He did not panic. He did not catastrophize. He ran through his options with the precision of a man solving a maths problem. He landed that plane on the Hudson River. Everyone survived. Sullenberger was later asked how he managed to remain calm. He said it wasn't something that happened in those 208 seconds. It was the result of 40 years of building and maintaining calm under pressure, in training, in non-emergency situations, in deliberate mental preparation. The emergency revealed who he had been building himself to be. The Stoics made a distinction that most modern people collapse together. They separated the event from the experience of the event. The event, the crisis, the conflict, the setback, exists in the external world and is largely outside your control. The experience of it, how you interpret it, what meaning you assign it, how your body and mind respond to it, that lives inside you and is entirely within your control. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." That's not a motivational poster. That is a functional operating principle for navigating reality. The Stoic practice for stress was called the view from above. When you're in the middle of a crisis, your perspective narrows. The problem fills your entire field of vision. The Stoics practiced mentally zooming out, first to the room, then to the city, then to the country, then to the planet, then to the cosmos, until the problem was placed in its correct proportion. Tool 1. Physiological reset. This is not optional. When your stress response activates, your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for rational decision-making, partially shuts down. You literally cannot think as well when you're panicking. The fastest way to reverse this is through controlled breathing. Not deep breathing, controlled breathing. 4 counts in, hold 4, 6 counts out. The extended exhale activates your parasympathetic nervous system. Do this 3 times. You will notice a measurable shift in your mental clarity within 90 seconds. Tool 2. The naming practice. Psychologist Dan Siegel coined the phrase, "Name it to tame it." When you feel a strong negative emotion arising, name it precisely. Not "I feel bad." That's too vague. "I feel anxious because I'm afraid this situation is going to reveal a failure on my part, and I'm worried what that says about me." The act of precise naming activates your prefrontal cortex and dampens your amygdala response. You literally think better when you name your emotions accurately. Tool 3. The controllable list. Take whatever is causing you stress. Draw a mental line down the middle. On one side, what can I control or influence here? On the other, what is completely outside my control? Now, and this is the discipline, put your energy only into the left column. The right column gets 0, not a reduction, 0. This is not passivity. This is strategic focus, and it is the fastest route to effective action. The eye of the storm doesn't move. The chaos swirls around it. Your job is not to stop the storm. Your job is to be the eye. Habit 6. Architect your own North Star. There's a psychological phenomenon called the default mode network. When your brain isn't actively focused on a task, it doesn't go quiet. It starts generating thoughts automatically, usually about yourself, your social relationships, your past and your future. And research consistently shows that this default mode is slightly negatively biased. Left to its own devices, your brain will tend toward worry, comparison, and a vague sense of dissatisfaction. This is not a flaw. It's an evolutionary adaptation. Brains that anticipated problems survived longer than brains that didn't, but it means that if you don't consciously give your mind a direction to move in, it will drift. And drift, compounded over years, becomes a life that feels like it happened to you rather than one you chose. Viktor Frankl spent 3 years in Nazi concentration camps, including Auschwitz. He lost his wife, his parents, his brother, and the manuscript of his life's work. He had every reason to collapse completely, but he observed something in the camps that changed his understanding of human psychology permanently. He noticed that the prisoners who survived the longest, and not just physically but psychologically, who maintained their humanity and dignity even in the most degrading conditions, were those who had a reason, a purpose, something that made the suffering meaningful in some frame, however small, a person they wanted to see again, a book they wanted to finish writing, a child they wanted to return to. He called this the will to meaning, and he concluded that a man can bear almost any how if he has a strong enough why. The Stoics called this living according to your logos, your reason, your guiding principle, your purpose. They believed that each person had a unique function, a role that was theirs to fulfill, and that the good life consisted of discovering that function and executing it with full commitment. Seneca, who was one of the wealthiest and most influential men in Rome, wrote frequently about the danger of spending your life pursuing things that other people told you were important. He wrote, "It is not that I am brave, but that I know the things which are not worth fearing, and the things which are." He was talking about the clarity that comes when you know what actually matters to you. Most people have never spent a single serious hour thinking about what they actually want from their life. Not what they're supposed to want, not what their parents wanted, not what their social group validates, but what they genuinely, uniquely want. And so they end up living borrowed lives. Here is a simple but unusually powerful exercise. Get a blank piece of paper. Write down, in 10 years, if I look back and feel deeply satisfied with how I lived, what would have had to be true? Not in terms of possessions or status, in terms of how you lived, what you contributed, who you became, what you stood for. Then write, what am I currently doing that moves me toward that version of my life, and what am I currently doing that moves me away from it? The gap between those two columns is where your architectural work begins. You cannot hit a target you cannot see. Your North Star isn't something you find, it's something you construct, deliberately, thoughtfully, and then you navigate toward it every single day, one decision at a time. Habit 7. Plant your flag and hold the line. In 1951, social psychologist Solomon Asch conducted one of the most disturbing experiments in the history of psychology. He put a subject in a room with a group of actors. They were all shown a series of lines and asked to identify which line matched a reference line in length. The answer was obvious, and the actors deliberately would give the wrong answer. Out loud, confidently. Over and over, ordinary people, knowing the correct answer, changed their answer to match the group, just to avoid standing out, just to avoid the social discomfort of disagreement, even when they knew they were right. 75% of participants conformed at least once. When asked afterwards why they changed their answer, many said they thought they must have been wrong, even though they weren't. This is not a story about weak people. This is a story about all people. The pressure to conform is one of the most powerful forces in human psychology, and if you are not actively, consciously resisting it, it is shaping your choices right now. Making your stand is not about being contrarian. It's not about arguing for the sake of it or making your identity synonymous with disagreement. The Stoics were very clear on this. Zeno of Citium, the founder of Stoic philosophy, was known for the quality of his listening before his speaking. He did not make his stand carelessly or impulsively. He considered, he evaluated. And then, when he had established what was true and what he believed, he held that position with remarkable stability. The distinction the Stoics made was between an opinion and a value. Opinions are negotiable. They should be updated when you receive new evidence. Values are not negotiable. They are the load-bearing walls of your character, and if you compromise them for social ease, you don't lose just your integrity. You lose your sense of self. And a person without a stable sense of self is extraordinarily vulnerable to manipulation, to depression, and to the kind of chronic low-level anxiety that comes from not knowing who you actually are. Write down, right now or tonight, 5 things that are non-negotiable in how you live. Not aspirational things, not things you wish were true. Things that are actually true. Things that you will not compromise, regardless of social pressure, regardless of financial incentive, regardless of who is in the room. Maybe it's honesty, maybe it's loyalty to the people you love, maybe it's the refusal to participate in cruelty of any kind, maybe it's your commitment to your own growth. Whatever they are, write them down, because the act of writing them creates a contract with yourself, and the next time you're in a situation where you feel the pressure to betray one of those values, and that situation will come, it always does, you'll have something to return to. Something that says, "This is who I am. This is where I stand." Epictetus said, "First say to yourself what you would be, and then do what you have to do." That sequence matters. Clarity of identity first, action second. When you know who you are, the decisions become easier. You don't have to deliberate in the moment. You've already decided. Plant your flag. And when the wind comes, and it will, hold the line. Habit 8. Sharpen the blade of wit. There's a common misunderstanding about Stoicism. People think it's serious, solemn, humorless, a philosophy of gritted teeth and furrowed brows. Then you actually read Seneca. Seneca, tutor to Emperor Nero, one of the most powerful men in Rome, had a razor-sharp, frequently irreverent sense of humor. He mocked pretentiousness, including his own. He wrote entire letters satirizing the absurdity of wealthy Romans who philosophized about the simple life from their multiple villas. And Marcus Aurelius, in his private journals, showed a dry wit that scholars have noted but popular culture ignores. He described certain politicians with a precision of observation that was essentially, quietly, devastating. Wit is not a distraction from Stoic practice. It is an expression of it. Because humor, real humor, not performance, requires the ability to see things clearly, to recognize the gap between what is and what is pretended, and to communicate that gap with precision and timing. That is fundamentally a Stoic skill. Research on psychological resilience consistently identifies humor as one of the strongest predictors of the ability to recover from adversity. Not the ability to make jokes, the ability to find something genuinely absurd or ironic in difficult situations. To see the gap between the seriousness with which we regard our problems and the actual scale of those problems in the context of a very large universe. There is a concept in cognitive therapy called cognitive diffusion, the ability to create a slight distance between yourself and your thoughts so that you observe them rather than being consumed by them. Humor does this naturally. When you can find something funny about a difficult situation, not dismissive, not trivializing, but genuinely funny, you have created distance. You have moved from being inside the experience to observing it, and from that position you can think far more clearly. Nick Vujicic was born without arms or legs. He has built a global career as a speaker, an author, and an advocate for people with disabilities. He is also genuinely, effortlessly funny, often at his own expense. He has said that learning to laugh at his situation, really laugh, not perform laughter, was one of the most liberating things he ever did. It was the moment he stopped being the problem and started being the person dealing with the problem. Real wit is not something you perform, it's something you develop by paying close attention to reality. Here's how. First, read widely. Comedy writers, essayists, satirists, not because you want to steal their jokes, but because different styles of observation train your brain to notice incongruities, contradictions, and absurdities in the world around you. That noticing muscle is the foundation of genuine wit. Second, stop taking your ego so seriously. The quickest way to develop wit is to practice being genuinely self-deprecating. Not in a self-pitying way, but in the way of a person who finds their own limitations genuinely amusing rather than threatening. That security in your own imperfection is both the source and the signal of true confidence. Third, practice the pause. Wit requires timing, and timing requires the ability to resist the urge to fill every silence immediately. Learn to pause, to observe, to let a moment develop before you respond to it. The funniest and most insightful people in any room are rarely the loudest. They're the most observant. Sharpen the blade. It's sharper than most people realize. Habit 9. Give everyone the dignity they are owed, and not 1 penny more. Here is something nobody says clearly enough. Respect and agreement are not the same thing. Respect and close friendship are not the same thing. Respect and unlimited access to your time are not the same thing. The Stoics practiced something they called cosmopolitanism, the idea that all human beings share a common rational nature, that we are all citizens of the same human community, regardless of geography, status, or belief. And from that shared nature flows a basic dignity that every person is owed, not because they've earned it, because they're human. That's a very different thing from what modern culture often confuses with respect, which is essentially unconditional positive regard, or the expectation that treating someone well means always agreeing with them, always accommodating them, always making them feel validated. Cato the Younger is one of the most striking figures in Roman history. He was known, even by his enemies, as a man of absolute integrity. Julius Caesar, who was his political opponent and who ultimately defeated him, once said that Cato was the only man he could not corrupt, bribe, or flatter. And yet Cato was also known for being difficult. He disagreed publicly. He held positions that made people uncomfortable. He refused to use honeyed words when plain ones were more accurate. He was deeply respectful of human dignity and deeply unimpressed by human pretension. He gave everyone their due. He gave no one more than their due. That combination, that precise calibration, is one of the most powerful social skills you can develop. Real respect starts with the willingness to listen. Not to respond, to listen. There is a difference so significant that most people miss it entirely. Listening means that for the duration of a conversation, you hold the genuine possibility that the other person has something worth understanding, even if you disagree, even if you've heard a version of this before, even if you think you already know what they're going to say. This requires a quieting of the ego that most people find genuinely difficult, because the ego wants to be right. It wants to have already known. It wants to respond before the other person has finished speaking, because responding is performing knowledge, and the ego loves performance. Listening, real listening, is an act of profound respect, and it costs you nothing except the ego's entertainment. Beyond listening, beyond time, return what you borrow, acknowledge effort, even when the result falls short. Say thank you and mean it. These are not soft skills, they are signals of character. People track them, always. And remember, giving everyone the dignity they are owed does not mean letting anyone treat you without dignity. The Stoics were very clear on this. Self-respect is not vanity. It is the foundation upon which you treat others well. A person who does not respect themselves will either be a pushover or a tyrant, often both at different times. A person who respects themselves can afford to be genuinely generous to others, because their generosity comes from abundance, not from the desperate need to be liked. Habit 10. Memento mori. Let death sharpen your life. When a Roman general returned from a great military victory, he was granted a triumph, a ceremonial procession through the streets of Rome. The crowds cheered, flowers were thrown. It was one of the greatest honors in the Roman world. And standing behind the general in the same chariot was a slave, whose only job was to whisper repeatedly in the general's ear, "Memento mori, remember, you will die." Not as a curse, not as a threat, as a gift, as the most useful possible reminder in a moment of maximal glory. This too shall pass. You are mortal. Do not become intoxicated by this. The Stoics were obsessed with death, not in a morbid, anxious way, but in a clarifying way. They practiced something called the negative visualization of death. the deliberate contemplation of the possibility that any given day might be your last. Before you dismiss this as dark, consider what happens to your attention when you genuinely sit with that possibility for 60 seconds, genuinely, not performatively. The petty grievance you've been carrying for 3 weeks, does it still feel worth carrying? The conversation with your father that you keep postponing, does it still feel like something you can defer indefinitely? The goal you've been saying you'll start on Monday for 6 months, does Monday still feel like a safe assumption? Mortality is the great editor. When you hold it properly, it cuts through everything that doesn't matter with terrifying efficiency. Steve Jobs, who was famously influenced by Zen Buddhism, which shares many of Stoicism's insights on impermanence, said in his 2005 Stanford commencement address that asking himself every morning, "If today were the last day of my life, would I want to do what I'm about to do?" had been the most important tool in his decision-making for 33 years. That's not nihilism, that's precision. You don't need to spend your days fixated on death. That would be counterproductive. But a regular, honest engagement with your own mortality, even 5 minutes a week, will do more for your sense of purpose than most productivity systems combined. Ask yourself, if I knew I had 6 months left, what would I stop doing immediately? What would I start doing immediately? Who would I call? What would I forgive, including myself? The answers to those questions are not hypothetical. They are a direct map of what actually matters to you, and the things that actually matter to you are the things your life should be organized around. Memento mori. Remember you will die, not as a shadow over your life, but as the sharpest possible argument for living it fully now. Habit 11. Practice the evening reckoning. If the morning practice is the foundation, the evening reckoning is the architecture review. And almost nobody does it seriously. Seneca wrote in one of his letters, "I examine my entire day and go back over what I've done and said, hiding nothing from myself, passing nothing by." He did this every evening, without exception, not as an exercise in self-flagellation, but as what he called making peace with oneself. The Pythagoreans, whose tradition influenced early Stoic thought, had a specific protocol for this. They asked themselves 3 questions before sleep, every night. What did I do wrong today? What did I do right today? What could I have done better? 3 questions, in that order. The wrong first, not to punish yourself, but to ensure honest accounting. The right second, not as self-congratulation, but because learning from what worked is as important as learning from what didn't. The improvement third, as a forward-looking commitment, not a backward-looking verdict. Professor Timothy Wilson at the University of Virginia has studied what he calls the importance of personal narratives, the stories we tell ourselves about our days, our choices, and our character. His research consistently shows that people who engage in regular, structured self-reflection make better decisions over time, not because they become perfect, but because they develop the habit of noticing the patterns in their own behavior. Most people are not aware of their patterns. They make the same mistake in the same type of situation repeatedly and experience it each time as though it's new and unexpected. Regular evening reflection breaks that cycle. It allows you to see yourself clearly enough to actually change. There's also a significant benefit to sleep. When you review your day before sleeping, consciously processing what happened rather than leaving it to your unconscious to work through chaotically during the night, you sleep better. Your brain has already done the emotional sorting. It doesn't need to use your sleep for that purpose. This doesn't require a lengthy journal. It doesn't require a specific format. It requires honesty and approximately 10 minutes. Tonight and every night this week, before you sleep, ask yourself 3 things. Where did I show up as the person I want to be today? Where did I fall short? And what specific, concrete thing will I do differently tomorrow? That last question is crucial. The reckoning is only as valuable as the adjustment it produces. An evening review that ends in self-criticism without forward commitment is not Stoic practice. It's rumination. The Stoics were not interested in guilt. They were interested in improvement. Close each day with honesty. Open each morning with intention. Do that consistently for 90 days, and your life will not look the same. So here we are. 11 habits, not 11 ideas. 11 practices. Things you can do, starting tomorrow morning, starting tonight actually, with the evening reckoning. Let me remind you what this is really about, because I want you to leave this video with the right frame. The Stoics were not interested in perfection. They were not claiming to have all the answers. Marcus Aurelius, the most powerful man in the world during his reign, wrote in his private journal about his own impatience, his own frustrations, his own failures to live up to the principles he believed in. Every single day he was trying. Every single day he fell short in some way. And every single day he tried again. That is the practice, not the achievement, the practice. You are not competing with anyone. You are not trying to become a different person. You are trying to become more fully the person that already exists inside you. Underneath the conditioning, underneath the noise, underneath the fear of what other people think. These 11 habits are not a program. They're a compass. You don't follow a compass perfectly. You use it to find your direction when you get lost. And you will get lost. That's not failure. That's the human experience. The question is not whether you get lost. It's how quickly you find your way back. If you watch this entire video, congratulations. Not because you deserve a reward for that, but because you made a choice today to invest 3 hours in your own development rather than spending those 3 hours on something that would have left you exactly where you started. That choice matters. Don't underestimate it. Now the question is, what happens next? Tell me in the comments, which one of these 11 habits hit you the hardest? Which one are you going to start tonight? I read every comment. I want to know. And if this was worth your time, share it with one person who you think needs to hear it. Not for my numbers, because you actually think it would help them. That's the only reason that matters. Until the next one, stay grounded, stay sharp, and remember, you are always, always building something. Make sure you're building something worth standing in. Take care of yourselves.